The Indian team felt the power of silence from Modi and Pichai. The stadium was alive with sound. People shouted, drums rolled, and flags waved like waves in the sea. The Indian cricket team had just entered, ready to face one of the hardest matches of their lives. Every fan wanted to be louder than the next, to show their pride. Yet in the middle of this storm of voices, there was something unexpected, something no one could have imagined. Prime Minister Modi and Sundar Pichai had taken their seats side by side. The crowd noticed, cameras flashed, and the players stole glances. But the strange thing was not their presence, it was their silence. Both men sat calm, hands folded, eyes steady. They spoke no word, they clapped no hands. Only their quietness filled the space. At first, people thought it was just respect, a simple pause. But as minutes passed, the silence grew heavier. The cheering still went on, but slowly some voices began to soften, as if they could feel that calm power spreading outward. It was almost as if the silence had its own sound, one deeper than any shout. Inside the dressing room, the Indian team could feel it too. One young player, nervous about his debut, said to another, "Do you feel that? It's like the air is heavier, like someone is watching us not with judgment but with expectation." His teammate nodded. "Yes, it's not pressure. It feels like trust." The coach, who had seen many matches in his life, walked in and spoke quietly. "Look at the stands. Do you see Modi and Pichai? They are not yelling. They are not giving speeches. They are reminding us that strength is not always in the noise. Sometimes it is in the stillness. On the field, the opponent was strong. Pakistan's team came ready, eyes sharp, shoulders straight. They too noticed the silence from the Indian side of the crowd. It unsettled them. They had expected noise, chaos, distraction, but instead they saw discipline. And then the moment of conflict came. In the very first over, India lost a wicket. The crowd gasped. Normally, this would bring panic, groans, or anger, but this time it was different. The stands went silent again, following the lead of Modi and Pichai. No blame, no anger, just quiet strength. The new batsman walked in. His legs shook, his heart raced. But when he looked up at the crowd, he saw two calm faces watching him. No words, no advice, no sign of disappointment. Just silence, steady and full of belief. In that moment, something inside him shifted. He thought, if they can stay calm, so can I. Over the next few overs, the team began to play with a new kind of focus. The noise outside no longer mattered. They were not chasing the cheers. They were not fearing the boos. They were only listening to the silence, and in it, they found clarity. Sundar Pichai leaned a little toward Modi and spoke softly, almost like a whisper that only the Prime Minister could hear. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give them is not advice, but space. Space to find their own courage. Modi smiled, his eyes still fixed on the pitch. Silence is not empty, Sundar. Silence is full of meaning. Today they will feel it. And indeed they did. Every boundary was not met with wild cheers, but with quiet nods. Every mistake was not met with shouts, but with patience. The crowd began to follow this rhythm, and soon the entire stadium, even with thousands of people, felt strangely peaceful. The commentators were confused. One of them said, "I have never seen a match like this. It's as if silence itself is playing for India." Another replied, "Maybe this is what the players need. Not the weight of voices, but the strength of belief." Inside the Indian team, the change was real. The captain, known for his fiery temper, found himself calmer than ever. He guided his players not with shouts, but with steady words. "Trust yourselves," he said. "Play with patience. The noise of the world will not decide our fate. Our hearts will." And in that moment, as the sun dipped lower and shadows stretched across the field, the match turned into more than just a game. It became a test of inner strength, of how much a person could endure, of how deeply silence could reach into the soul. The young debut player, who had once been nervous, struck a clean shot that rolled across the boundary. He raised his head not to the crowd, not to the cameras, but to the two silent figures in the stands. For the first time in his life, he felt what true respect meant. It was not in shouting his name. It was in silent belief. And so, as the innings continued, India found a rhythm built not on noise but on stillness. Every bat, Every ball, every run carried the weight of that silence, a silence that was louder than any cheer. This was only the beginning. The match had just started, but already something had changed in the heart of the players and the people. Modi and Pichai had shown them a different kind of power, one that no one had expected, a power that came not from sound, but from silence. The silence becomes a force. The match had only moved into its early overs, yet the atmosphere had changed in a way no one could deny. It was strange, almost unsettling, how thousands of people could sit in one place and choose not to fill the air with endless noise. Silence, usually a stranger to cricket stadiums, had become a guest of honor. It wrapped itself around every seat, every player, and even the blades of grass on the pitch seemed to bend under its weight. In the Indian dressing room, the players whispered to one another during the short break. The debut player, still glowing from his boundary shot, spoke with a trembling voice. "I do not know why, but I felt different out there. I could not hear the crowd. I could only feel it. It was as if their silence was speaking to me." An older player, who had carried the burden of many defeats in his career, nodded slowly. "Yes, I felt it too. It was not like pressure. It was like being seen for who we are, not just for what we score." The coach, usually loud and commanding, was quiet himself. He had noticed how Modi and Pichai had not clapped, not waved, not stood up to give instructions. Instead, they sat still, and in their stillness, there was something larger than words. He said to the team, "This silence is not weakness. It is a reminder. We are not here to prove ourselves to the noise of the world. We are here to prove ourselves to our own hearts." Out on the field, Pakistan's players were not immune to the effect either. They had expected India's crowd to roar after every run, to intimidate them with constant chanting. But instead, the silence from the Indian supporters confused them. One of their bowlers muttered under his breath to his captain, "Why are they so quiet? It feels like they are hiding something, like they know something we don't." The captain shrugged, but even he felt a small shiver crawl up his spine. The commentators tried to explain it to the millions watching on television. "Ladies and gentlemen," one said, "we are witnessing something rare. Modi and Pichai are in the stands, and their silence seems to have spread across the whole crowd. I can't believe I'm saying this, but it's as if the energy of the match has changed because of two men simply sitting still." His partner replied, "Silence is not empty. Sometimes it's the loudest message of all. I think the Indian players understand that now." As the overs continued, India began to rebuild after the early loss. Each run was taken with patience, each ball defended with care. The players were not rushing, not desperate. They were calm, focused, and resilient. The silence gave them strength to resist panic. Even when another wicket fell, the crowd did not groan or cry out. They stayed silent, and that silence seemed to whisper, "We still believe." In the stands, Sundar Pichai leaned forward slightly, his glasses catching the sunlight. He remembered his own days as a student in India, when he had faced exams and challenges. His father never shouted at him when he failed. Instead, his father's quiet eyes and patient face had pushed him to try harder. He thought to himself, "This is the same lesson. Silence can carry more love and more belief than 1,000 words." Modi, sitting beside him, closed his eyes for a moment. He had seen battles in politics, moments when voices clashed like storms. But he had also seen the moments when a single pause, a single breath, could calm the fire of anger. He knew today was one of those moments. He thought, the youth of India must learn that resilience is not built on noise. It is built on the strength of silence. Then came the turning point of the game. India faced one of the fastest bowlers, known for his fierce deliveries. The crowd held its breath, and in that silence the bowler charged. The ball flew like lightning. The batsman struck it, and it soared high into the sky. For a second, everyone froze, watching the white ball climb, hang, and fall toward the boundary line. The crowd did not scream. They watched in silence as the ball landed just beyond the ropes for 6 runs. Only then did a wave of quiet clapping rise, not wild, not chaotic, but gentle and steady. It was as if thousands of hands had agreed to speak with one voice, not with shouting, but with measured respect. The Pakistani fielders looked around, confused. They had never seen such a thing. One muttered, Are we playing cricket, or are we standing in a temple? But that was exactly how it felt. The stadium had become a temple of silence where every run, every shot was sacred. Inside the Indian team, the batsman who had hit the six lowered his head in respect. He did not raise his bat, he did not pump his fist. He simply looked to the stands toward Modi and Pichai and placed his hand over his heart. For him, that silent acknowledgement meant more than any cheer could have. The match moved forward, and with every over, the silence grew stronger. People at home watching on TV began to notice too. In living rooms across India, families sat quieter than usual, following the mood of the stadium. Some fathers told their children, "Look, this is what discipline looks like. You don't always need to shout to show your love." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in orange and gold, the silence of the stadium looked almost magical. The players felt like they were not only playing cricket, but living through a lesson that would stay with them forever. This was no longer about bat and ball alone. It was about resilience, about patience, about respect. It was about finding strength in stillness. And as Modi and Pichai continued to sit calm, the silence became a force that no one on the field could ignore. When silence began to shape destiny, the evening grew deeper, and the shadows in the stadium stretched longer across the green field. The sky turned from orange to purple, and the floodlights blinked alive one by one, bathing the pitch in bright white. Yet even with all the noise of life, the hum of lights, the faint calls of vendors, the clicking of cameras, there remained that strange silence, steady and unbroken, flowing like a river through the stadium. Players who had once thought they thrived on the roar of fans now realized something surprising. Without the constant shouts, they could hear their own thoughts. The sound of the ball hitting the bat was sharper. The running footsteps across the pitch felt heavier, and the beating of their own hearts seemed louder than the entire crowd. It was as if the silence had opened a doorway inside them. The Indian captain, a man known for his fire, felt the shift most deeply. Usually when a wicket fell, he would shout, wave his arms, and try to control everything around him. But today, under the calm eyes of Modi and Pichai, he chose to act differently. When his teammate played a risky shot and lost his wicket, the captain walked up to him not with anger but with a hand on the shoulder. "Don't worry," he whispered. "We play together, we fall together. Let the silence guide us, not fear." The player looked back at him surprised, because he had never heard such gentleness from his leader before, across the field. Pakistan's players noticed this calmness too. One of their senior bowlers frowned and said to his teammate, "Why do they look so calm? We have taken their wickets, yet they do not break. It is as if they are made of stone tonight." His teammate replied nervously, "Maybe they are drawing strength from something we cannot see." In the stands, Sundar Pichai's eyes followed every ball with quiet focus. He was not a cricketer, but he knew the rhythm of challenges. He thought back to his own journey, leaving India for America, building a career step by step, facing criticism, doubt, and pressure. Yet through it all, he had learned that staying calm in storms was the key. Tonight, he hoped that lesson was passing from him to the players below. Modi sat still, his hands resting gently on his knees. His silence was not empty. It was a signal. It said, "Do not let noise control you. Let your soul speak louder." Every time the cameras caught his face, people at home watching on television felt that message without a word being spoken. Families whispered to one another, "Look how calm he is. Look how still Sundar is. This is the kind of discipline we should learn." Then came a moment of high tension. India needed to steady their innings, but the Pakistani bowler was fierce, sending down fast deliveries that cut through the air like arrows. The Indian batsman, a young man under immense pressure, nearly edged one into the keeper's hands. The crowd gasped, yet again no loud scream followed. Instead, the silence deepened. That silence entered the young batsman's chest. His breath slowed, his shaking hands steadied. He thought to himself, "They are not shouting at me. They are not blaming me. They are waiting for me to believe in myself." And so, with the next ball, he planted his feet firmly, raised his bat, and struck a powerful shot straight down the ground. The ball raced past the bowler, past the fielders, and into the boundary rope. A wave of applause spread through the stands, not wild cheering, not chaos, but rhythmic clapping, slow and respectful, like the beat of a drum in a temple. The sound echoed softly through the stadium, and the batsman raised his bat slightly, not in pride, but in gratitude. He turned his eyes toward Modi and Pichai, who remained seated in silence, their faces glowing faintly under the floodlights. He felt their quiet belief enter him like a force. The commentators tried to put it into words, but even they struggled. "Ladies and gentlemen," one said, his voice hushed, "I have been calling matches for 20 years, and I have never seen anything like this." The silence of two men has changed the very spirit of the game. The Indian team is not just batting. They are meditating on the pitch. His partner added, "This is not cricket alone. This is something deeper. This is about resilience, respect, and the courage to trust yourself." Meanwhile, in the dressing room, the substitute players watched with wide eyes. One whispered, "Is this how legends are born?" "Not in noise, but in silence." Another answered, "Yes. Today we are learning that silence is not empty. It is full of faith." The match pressed on, each over heavier than the last. Pakistan fought hard, their bowlers fierce and their fielders sharp. But India did not crumble. Every time a challenge came, the silence seemed to wrap around the players like a shield. When the ball missed the bat by inches, the silence steadied their hearts. When a risky run nearly ended in disaster, the silence gave them patience to breathe and continue. And so, as the runs slowly began to build, a new confidence filled the Indian side. They were not just playing to win, they were playing to prove that humility and patience could be stronger than panic and noise. They were learning that resilience is born not from shouting but from listening, to silence, to themselves, to the quiet belief of those who trust them. Modi turned slightly to Sundar and spoke in a low tone, his first words in a long time. "Do you see how they grow? Sometimes you must not command. Sometimes you must simply sit still and let them rise on their own." Sundar nodded, his eyes fixed on the field. "Yes," he replied softly. The silence is teaching them more than any speech could, and deep within the stadium everyone could feel it too. This was no longer just a match. This was the birth of a lesson that would last beyond cricket, beyond sport, beyond this night. The silence was not just in the stadium now, it was inside every player, every fan, and every heart watching across the world. The silence turns into strength. The night had fully arrived, and under the bright floodlights, the field shone like a stage where every movement mattered. The stadium still held thousands of people, but it no longer felt like a crowd. It felt like a single body, breathing in rhythm, held together by the quiet strength that Modi and Pichai had carried with them into the stands. Every ball, every run, every step across the grass seemed to echo in the silence. It was no longer just a lack of sound. It had become a living presence, almost like a voice of its own. The Indian players felt it pressing on their backs, steadying their hands, calming their nerves. They had faced tough matches before, but never had they played with such a strange, powerful kind of focus. The captain stood at the non-striker's end, his bat tapping softly on the pitch as he prepared for the next delivery. He had been known for fiery outbursts, for shouting instructions, for carrying the weight of the entire nation on his shoulders with restless energy. But tonight, as he looked into the stands and saw Modi and Pichai seated calmly, their eyes steady, he felt that he did not need to shout anymore. He felt something heavier, something deeper, a responsibility not just to win, but to carry himself with dignity. The next delivery was fast, sharp, and brutal. The batsman on strike barely managed to defend it, the ball shooting off his bat dangerously close to the stumps. The crowd gasped, but again there was no roar of panic. Instead, the silence deepened, and in that silence the batsman steadied himself, breathing slowly, gripping the bat tighter. Inside the Pakistani camp, tension began to grow. They had come expecting chaos, noise, and pressure from the crowd. But this calmness was something else, something unnerving. One of their bowlers muttered to his captain, "It feels like we are fighting ghosts, not men. Why are they so quiet? Why don't they break?" The captain frowned. Silence is their weapon tonight. It is making them stronger. In the commentary box, even the broadcasters struggled to capture what was happening. "This is surreal," one of them said softly. "We are in a stadium of thousands, yet it feels like a library where every sound matters." Modi and Pichai have not said a single word, but their silence has reshaped this match, his partner added. "You can see it in the players. Every shot, every run, they are no longer chasing cheers. They are chasing something within themselves." In the stands, Sundar Pichai watched with deep focus, his hands resting on his lap, his body still. His mind, however, was racing with memory. He thought of the moments when he had sat through long meetings, facing criticism, when his only answer had been patience. He thought of the times when silence had saved him from anger and given him clarity. Watching the young Indian batsmen now, he felt as if they were learning that same lesson, on the field, in front of the world. Modi, sitting beside him, allowed himself a faint smile. His silence was deliberate, an example. He had seen young people often confuse noise with power, but tonight he was showing them that silence itself could be the sharpest weapon, the most enduring shield. As the cameras turned to him again, families across India watching on TV leaned closer, as though his calm face carried a message meant for them too. Strength is not always loud. The match turned into a battle of endurance. Every over was tight, every run precious. India still needed stability, and Pakistan refused to give in easily. Yet even when wickets fell, there was no despair. The players walked back to the pavilion with their heads high, and the silence of the crowd wrapped around them like a blanket, reminding them that failure was not the end, only part of the journey. Then came a critical moment. India was in desperate need of a partnership to hold the innings together. A young batsman, no more than 22, stood on strike. His career was new, his shoulders untested by such heavy expectations. The bowler charged in, delivering a fiery ball that curved dangerously. The batsman swung and the ball soared high into the night sky. For a long second, the entire stadium held its breath. The ball descended toward the fielder on the boundary. It looked certain to be caught. The Indian dugout froze. The Pakistani players prepared to celebrate. But at the very last moment, the fielder misjudged the ball, and it slipped from his hands. It bounced over the rope for 6 runs. Normally, the stadium would have exploded with cheers, drums, and horns. But tonight, the reaction was different. The silence lingered for a second longer, then broke into a slow, unified rhythm of clapping. It was not noise for the sake of noise. It was respect. It was encouragement. It was belief. The young batsman looked up, overwhelmed. He expected screams, but what he received was more powerful. He saw Modi and Pichai, still silent, still calm, yet their very stillness filled him with confidence. He felt as if they were telling him, "You are not alone. We trust you. Play with courage." Inside the Indian team, the mood changed again. The players began to talk less, to move with more discipline. They stopped chasing rash shots and started playing with patience. Every run was built with care, every moment treated with respect. In the dressing room, the substitute players and staff could feel the change too. One of them whispered, "This silence is not empty. It is carrying us. It is carrying the team." The coach, usually loud, only nodded in agreement. This is what the young ones must learn. Victory is not in shouting. It is in standing tall, even when your lips do not move. And so, as the partnership grew stronger, India slowly began to rise again. The scoreboard ticked forward, not quickly, not dramatically, but with steady progress. Resilience had replaced panic. Patience had replaced fear. Silence had replaced noise. The match was no longer just about cricket. It had turned into a lesson for everyone watching, in the stadium and across the world. It was teaching that humility could be stronger than pride, that patience could outlast fear, and that silence could speak louder than any crowd. Silence under fire. The scoreboard was steady now, but the battle was far from over. India had rebuilt slowly, piece by piece, yet the pressure of the match was still heavy. Pakistan's bowlers were relentless, their deliveries cutting through the night air like arrows. The Indian batsmen felt the sting of every ball, the weight of every over, yet they stood firm, anchored not by the roar of the crowd, but by the stillness that surrounded them. The silence was no longer just an atmosphere. It had become a shield. Every time the Pakistani players celebrated a close call, every time the ball rushed past the bat, the crowd did not collapse into despair. They stayed calm, following Modi and Pichai's example. The young debut player who had once trembled, under the weight of expectation, now carried himself like a veteran. When the ball narrowly missed his stumps, instead of panic, he raised his head and breathed deeply. He thought to himself, "If they can sit in silence, I can stand in silence too." The Pakistani team began to feel unsettled. Their captain gathered his players together, whispering with frustration. "We are doing everything, fastballs, sharp fielding, but why are they not breaking? Why do they still look calm?" One of his bowlers replied, "It's the silence. They are drawing strength from it. It feels like they are not just fighting us, but something bigger." On the commentary panel, the broadcasters tried to explain what was unfolding before their eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," one said, his voice quieter than usual, "this is no ordinary match. Modi and Pichai have turned silence into a weapon. The Indian players are no longer reacting to the pressure of the game. They are learning to breathe through it." The second commentator added, "I've seen teams collapse under noise, but I have never seen a team rise under silence. This is extraordinary." In the stands, Sundar Pichai leaned slightly forward, his eyes glowing under the floodlights. He remembered the endless hours he had spent as a student, preparing for exams in a small house where every sound mattered. His father would not shout when he made mistakes. Instead, his father's quiet patience had forced him to search within himself for strength. Now, as he watched the Indian players, Sundar realized that same lesson was alive tonight. Silence was not empty. It was guiding them. Modi remained still, his expression unreadable. But behind his eyes, he was reflecting on his own journey. Years of political storms, of facing criticism, of walking through battles where every word could cut. He had learned that sometimes the most powerful response was not to shout, but to wait. Tonight, he wanted the young players, and even the young viewers across India, to feel that lesson in their bones. And then came a test of that silence. India's captain, standing tall on the crease, faced a dangerous bowler who had already taken 2 wickets. The first ball was quick and brutal, hitting his pads and sparking a loud appeal from Pakistan. The umpire shook his head, and the stadium held its breath. The very next ball came flying in, straighter, sharper. The captain swung hard, but the ball edged the bat and soared into the air. For a moment, the world froze. The ball climbed high, the fielder under it ready to catch. The Indian players on the bench stood up, hands over their mouths. The Pakistani side shouted in excitement. The ball dropped, faster and faster, into the fielder's waiting hands. And then he fumbled. The ball slipped through his fingers, bounced off his chest, and fell to the ground. The captain survived. The stadium did not erupt in wild cheers. Instead, a wave of silence swept through, followed by slow, rhythmic clapping. The crowd did not scream his name. They gave him quiet belief. The captain, usually quick to raise his bat in pride, simply lowered his head in respect. He knew the silence was not praising him for luck. It was reminding him that resilience mattered more than fortune. The Pakistani players were furious. Their captain slammed his fist into his palm, shouting at the fielder, but even their anger seemed to weaken in the face of such calmness. They were playing against opponents who did not react with noise, who did not panic, who carried themselves as though silence itself was playing on their side. As overs passed, India's innings began to take shape. The young debut player and the captain built a partnership, one careful run at a time. They communicated with glances, small nods, and quiet trust. No shouts, no wild gestures, just silent understanding. The team on the bench mirrored this discipline. Instead of yelling encouragement, they sat still, clapping softly when needed, learning that even support could be calm. Back home, millions of viewers felt the difference too. In living rooms across India, families who usually shouted at the screen during matches found themselves speaking softly, almost whispering. Children asked their parents, "Why is everyone so quiet?" And the parents answered, "Because silence is stronger tonight. Silence is teaching us patience." Then came a moment that shifted everything. The debut player, now more confident, faced a fierce delivery. He struck it cleanly, and the ball raced across the ground, slicing through the fielders and smashing into the boundary rope. The scoreboard lit up, and the crowd once again responded with slow, steady applause. No screaming, no horns, just respect. He looked up at Modi and Pichai. They had not moved, not smiled, not clapped. Yet their silence felt louder than the applause. In his heart, he felt as if they were telling him, "This is only the beginning. Play with courage, and let your silence speak louder than your bat." As the partnership grew, India's confidence began to rise. Every run added weight to the silence, making it heavier, stronger, more unshakable. The players felt as if they were carrying not just their own hopes, but the quiet belief of an entire nation. Silence meets the storm. The match had entered its most dangerous phase. India had rebuilt with care, run by run, but now the overs were slipping away, and the scoreboard showed a mountain still left to climb. The air inside the stadium was heavy with tension. The floodlights glared down, making the sweat on the players' faces glisten like silver. Every eye, every camera, every heart was fixed on the pitch. And yet, through all of it, the silence remained. It had become the heartbeat of the night, steady, calm, unbroken. Pakistan sensed their chance. Their bowlers circled like hawks, their captain pointing fiercely, pushing his fielders closer, determined to choke the Indian batsmen. One bowler in particular, their fastest and most feared, was brought back into the attack. He charged down the pitch like a storm, his footsteps pounding, his delivery slicing through the air with brutal speed. The first ball was a bouncer, and it rose sharply toward the captain's chest. The captain ducked just in time, the ball sailing past his helmet. The Pakistani players shouted in excitement, their voices sharp and loud. But the crowd in the stadium stayed calm, still led by the silent figures of Modi and Pichai. Instead of drowning the moment in noise, the silence absorbed it, like an ocean swallowing a wave. The captain stood back up, tapped his bat against the pitch, and met the bowler's glare with eyes that did not flinch. The next ball came even faster, swinging in at deadly angle. The captain struck hard, but the ball skidded off the edge of his bat and shot toward the slips. The fielder dived, hands outstretched. The entire stadium inhaled at once, but the ball slipped through the fingers and rolled harmlessly away. Again, the crowd did not scream. Instead, there was only soft, rhythmic clapping, steady and calm. The captain raised his head toward the stands. He saw Modi, still calm as stone, and Sundar, his hands folded, his eyes unblinking. The captain felt his own heartbeat slow. He thought to himself, "They are not moved by luck or fear. Neither will I be. I will let my silence answer the storm." Pakistan grew restless. Their captain barked orders, but the silence of the Indian side unnerved them more than any shout could have. One of their bowlers muttered under his breath, "This feels unnatural. They don't cheer, they don't panic. It is as if we are not just fighting men, but their stillness." In the commentary box, one of the broadcasters spoke in a hushed tone. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you are seeing tonight is beyond cricket. India is not playing against noise. They are playing within silence, and in that silence they have found strength." His partner added, "Look at their faces. Every Indian player looks as if he has learned something greater than cricket. He has learned how to endure." The young debut player, now batting with his captain, carried the weight of expectation like a crown. He was sweating, his hands raw from gripping the bat, but his eyes burned with determination. With every ball, he remembered the silence of the crowd. He remembered how Modi and Pichai had not clapped for his boundary, not shouted for his six, not reacted at all. And he realized they were not there to give him noise. They were there to give him belief. The bowler charged again, his fiercest delivery yet. The ball pitched short, rose high, and threatened to strike the young player's helmet. Instinct told him to duck, but his heart told him to stand. He lifted his bat and, with all his strength, pulled the ball across the field. It raced toward the boundary, fielders chasing desperately, but it reached the rope. 4 runs. The crowd clapped softly, like waves lapping ashore. No chaos, no wildness, just respect. The young player's chest rose and fell as he looked up at the 2 silent figures. For the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to be trusted without words. Back home, across India, families watching on television felt the power of that moment. Children whispered to their parents, "Why is everyone so calm?" And the parents answered, "Because silence has given them strength. Look, our players are standing tall because they know they are not judged by noise." The innings grew more dangerous. Wickets had already fallen, and every mistake could turn the match. Pakistan attacked with everything they had, their bowlers fierce, their fielders sharp. But India's batsmen no longer carried fear. They carried silence. It was their shield, their fire, their calm. Sundar Pichai leaned close to Modi, his voice quiet. "Look at them. They are not just batting. They are learning how to lead, how to stand in storms." Modi nodded, his eyes steady. "This is why silence matters. It is not weakness. It is discipline. It teaches them to respect the game, respect themselves, respect even their opponents, and respect will make them stronger." As the overs ticked away, India's partnership grew. Not quickly, not dramatically, but steadily, like water carving through stone. Every run was earned, every moment held with care. The silence of the stadium had become their rhythm, their song, their strength. The storm of Pakistan's bowling was fierce, but the silence was fiercer. It refused to break, refused to waver. And in that silence, India's spirit grew unshakable. The victory of silence. The match reached its final overs, and the weight of every ball felt heavier than iron. The scoreboard told a story of pressure. India needed runs, but time was slipping away. The Pakistani bowlers were relentless, their deliveries sharp and merciless, testing the patience of every batsman. The fielders shouted, the captain clapped, their voices filled with urgency and fire. Yet, in the Indian half of the stadium, the silence still reigned, unbroken and calm, carried on the shoulders of Modi and Sundar Pichai. The Indian batsmen stood tall in that silence. The captain, hardened by years of battles, and the young debut player, still finding his place in the world, now stood together as if bound by an invisible thread. They did not need words. They exchanged only glances, small nods, quiet signals. Their partnership was not just of bats and runs. It was of belief, of trust, forged in silence. Pakistan threw everything at them. Yorkers screamed into the crease. Bouncers rose like thunder. Spinners twisted the ball like snakes on the pitch. Yet the Indian batsmen did not rush, did not panic. They defended with patience, attacked with care, and built their innings one heartbeat at a time. The silence in the stands was their guide, teaching them that greatness was not in haste, but in resilience. And then came the moment the world had been waiting for. India needed a boundary to seal the chase. The Pakistani bowler, their most dangerous weapon, took the ball in his hand. He glared at the batsman on strike, the young debut player. It was his test, his trial, his chance to prove himself not only as a cricketer, but as a man who had learned to carry silence as a strength. The bowler charged. His run-up fierce, his body like a storm breaking across the pitch. The ball left his hand with fire, swinging in at deadly speed. The debut player raised his bat, every nerve alive, every muscle steady. He struck with clarity, not with desperation, but with belief. The sound of the ball meeting the bat echoed across the stadium. Clean, sharp, powerful. The ball raced across the field, slicing through the air like lightning. The fielder on the boundary chased with all his might, diving at the rope. But it was too late. The ball struck the boundary boards and the stadium erupted. Yet even in eruption, the sound was different. It was not chaos. It was controlled, rhythmic, powerful. Thousands of hands clapped in unison, their applause rising like a wave. The Indian team rushed onto the field, but they did not scream. They did not throw their helmets into the air. They embraced one another with quiet smiles, with arms around shoulders, with the calm pride of men who knew they had earned not just victory, but wisdom. The cameras turned instantly to Modi and Pichai. They had not moved all match, and even now they did not leap to their feet. Instead, they shared a single glance, a silent nod. Sundar's lips curved into a faint smile, and Modi's eyes glowed with pride. Their silence had carried the team from fear to focus, from chaos to discipline, from pressure to triumph. The commentators could barely find words. One whispered, "Ladies and gentlemen, this will be remembered as the match of silence." Modi and Pichai never shouted, never clapped, but their stillness spoke louder than the noise of the world. The Indian team has not only won the game, they have learned a lesson for life. Another added, "This is what respect looks like. This is what humility looks like." Silence became their teacher, and resilience became their victory. In the dressing room after the match, the players sat in awe. The young debut player, still holding his bat, whispered to his captain, "I thought strength was in noise, in shouting, in proving myself. But today I learned that real strength is in silence. Silence gave me courage when nothing else could." The captain placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Remember this for the rest of your life. Cheers will fade, but silence will always stay with you." Outside the stadium, across India and the world, millions who had watched the match carried the same feeling. Parents told their children, "This is how you face life's storms, not by shouting louder than the world, but by standing calm when the world shouts at you." Young people whispered to themselves, "If silence can guide a cricket match, it can guide my struggles too." That night, the silence that had started with two men sitting side by side in the stands became more than just a memory. It became a lesson etched into the hearts of millions. Silence was no longer emptiness. Silence was respect. Silence was humility. Silence was resilience. Silence was kindness. And as the Indian players lifted their bats in the quiet celebration of victory, Modi and Pichai remained seated, their calm presence unchanged. They had not needed to speak because the world had already heard them.